Welcome to Thrive Deeper, the show based on the Thrive Bible reading guides. This is an ongoing conversation about God's Word with Thrive author, Dr. Matthew Jacoby.
Good morning, Matt.
Morning, Stu.
Thrive Deeper, Exodus, we continue. And the Exodus is really only just beginning, but
Yeah, that's right. Well, we get to the actual Exodus today.
Yeah, we do in this episode. So listeners, welcome. Great to have you with us. In the last couple of weeks, we've worked our way through the 9 of the 10 plagues. And you recall that Moses was commanded by God to go and demand from Pharaoh that he release his people. Of course, Pharaoh didn't. He hardened his heart. And every time Moses spoke a plague at God's instruction over the nation of Egypt, Pharaoh hardened his heart further. There were times when he kind of sort of said, yep, I'm wrong, I'll let you go, and then changed his mind, which, as you said, Matt, it's not that God made him that way. His heart was already hard, and all God really did was allow it to be made harder.
Yeah, it's worth reflecting actually on Pharaoh, because there is some reason behind Pharaoh's hardness of heart. Now, when I say reason, I don't mean it was right, but I think we need to be slow just to dismiss Pharaoh's concerns. Always think whenever you come across a bad character, we try to make him as unlike us as possible.
Well, we try to make ourselves the good guys.
Well, we would never be.
Exactly.
We would never do that. Well, see, the thing is, and this is important for where the story goes from here. So this, I think, is important to keep in mind. Pharaoh, we've got to remember, was responsible for maintaining the order, that sort of sacred order. And this is, as we mentioned in the last episode, these ancient civilizations like Egypt were these pockets of order in the midst of what they perceived as sort of wilderness of chaos. And so civilization was life. It was people, would live under tyrants rather than be out on their own. Yeah. This is how much these civilizations were seen as like life rafts of order in the midst of a chaotic ocean. And so the order was based very much on a hierarchy. So in our sister podcast Perspectives, we looked at the law of Moses and the way that the law of Moses looks to break down the hierarchies that were prevalent in the ancient world. But whereas laws like the ancient Babylonian law of Hammurabi were designed to keep the hierarchy in place. So hierarchies from the Indian caste system through to, in fact, ancient Greece and Rome, again, wanting to preserve the caste, essentially a caste system. Now, to upset that is to see everything dissolve into chaos, right? Yes. So the demand of Moses to let this people go is basically tantamount to the collapse of
the Egyptian empire.
Of the Egyptian.
For him anyway, yeah.
Well,
for Pharaoh,
it's going to lead, they play a very important role in the Egyptian economy and the order, right? They're the bottom caste. And for that, to lose that bottom caste is to completely cause the whole thing to cave in. So, I think it's important to recognize that. Now, in a sense, what happens, and this is what we saw in the last episode, and again, important to recap this, Stu, is that what happens as a result of Pharaoh is essentially holding on to a man-made order.
Yes.
And this is an important theme in Scripture because there's a God-made order and there's a man-made order. And the choices there, are you going to live according to a man-made order or are you going to live according to a God-made order? So what Pharaoh is holding on to is his man-made order, right? And God is wanting to save his people out of that man-made order and lead them into a new order, a new kind of life, right? Now, part of the struggle of the Israelites, even when they go out into the desert, they're often saying, we should just go back to Egypt, right?
Yeah. At least we
knew.
knew.
And you think, how could they want such a thing? Weren't they slaves? But you see,
because bad order was better than not knowing what was going to happen
exactly.
next.
Yeah, exactly. So it's even hard for them, let alone Pharaoh. So essentially what God does is that he basically causes chaos to cave in over Egypt. And we saw the significance of the 10 plagues is essentially it's an act of anti-creation. Important that there are 10 corresponding with the 10 divine commands by which God creates the world in Genesis chapter 1 and corresponding with the 10 divine commands that he's going to give to his people on Mount Sinai and that are going to be inscribed on the tablets, the 10 commandments.
Yes.
Which is going to be the sort of core of the new order, right? And so he's drawing his people out of this. And the battle here is Pharaoh holding on to his order. It's the age-old struggle, the order of man against the order of God.
Yes, yeah.
And so this is now going to be important as we come out of Egypt. Pharaoh yet again we'll get there. He's still going to hold on.
Yeah.
And there's going to be the symbolism of the ocean.
Yeah.
Which we'll get to that. Which is
don't
forces
give
of chaos.
The story away.
I know. I just want to jump ahead.
Yeah.
So we ended with the ninth plague, Stu,
of darkness,
which was the plague of darkness, which is important because the first day of creation was God saying, "Let there be light." Right. So, and now, finally, we come to the plague on the firstborn. Now, this affects Pharaoh himself in a way that the other plagues didn't. Now, Pharaoh is seen to be a kind of demigod. The succession, this is the future of Egypt, the plague on the firstborn of Egypt, is kind of cutting off the future. It's like cutting off the life of Egypt. So this is the first time that death, that actual death itself. I mean, we've had boils and skin disease. We've had things affect their livelihood, but this is actually death on Egypt, and it's symbolized by the angel of death coming over. And of course, this is not going to affect the Israelites. It says, but the question is, how are they exempt compared to everyone else?
And I think that's a good point, because just before you move on to where I think you're going to move on to next, I think it's important to note that the death of the firstborn in Egypt was not just from the elite, the pharaohs, but right down to the slave girls. So no one. It wasn't about class was exempt at all. There was some other reason, which you're going to come to now as well. And this sounds harsh, but let's remember this is the Pharaoh who was commanding the Egyptians early on to be throwing the male children, babies, of the Israelites into the Nile to drown. And so we're not talking about someone who this seems really cruel to. He's been a pretty cruel ruler.
It's a good point, Stu, that you make, because the destruction of the Hebrew children, in a sense, activates the Abrahamic promise, which says, those who curse you, I will curse. And throughout the Psalms, that's often expressed in images like where the psalmist will say, they spread a net for me, but they've been caught in it themselves. Yeah. Or the sword that they meant for me has slain themselves. Yeah. And so there's this kind of bouncing curse, like those who curse you, I will curse. And so the other thing that this kind of climactic moment of this 10th plague does is that it actually is a direct activation of that Abrahamic, those who curse you, I will curse. So that comes back upon the Egyptians. So
now, one other thing, just before you move into the next section, is to remember also, listeners, that with the most recent of the plagues, I think the last 4, be 5 up until this point, where the Israelites were living, which was in Goshen, wasn't affected just because that's where they were and they were the Israelites. It's a little bit different with this one because it's not just about being an Israelite, it's about taking a particular action, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So it's interesting, Stu, that at this point, you've got this rapid action happening here, and then it all stops. Pause, right? Yeah. And we're at the climax, right? And they're about to leave Egypt, right? They're about to be finally released and become God's people, and then it's stop. And everything slows down. We get lots of detail.
Yes.
And God says, right, now, He's going to command them to have a meal. Now, I mean, this is and this is going to take some time because it's going to involve preparing a lamb and getting the materials together. I mean, they're thinking, let's just run away, for goodness sake, right? So there's a pause here, and they are going to have them in the midst of all of the chaos imploding in on Egypt. They are commanded to sit down
and have a meal.
It's like Psalm 23, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Yeah. Okay. But the meal is going to symbolize what it is actually that really distinguishes the basis of the consecration of this people. Now, the reason why the Israelites in the first place are being spared, this is an important question. Why are they being spared?
Yes.
Right? What is it that makes them special?
Because I'm sure there would have been idolatry amongst the Israelite people still.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not that they're morally any better.
Yeah.
Absolutely. As God says again and again and again, He says, I have set you apart. I have consecrated you, right?
Yeah.
Which means He's set this people apart, not because they're anything special or because they're better, but by an act of redemption. And the symbolism of the meal that they're going to have, the killing of the lamb, is going to command them to take hyssop, which is a plant, dip it in the blood, and place it over the doors and the lintels.
This is in the blood of the animal that they've killed.
Blood of the lamb, right?
Yep. a lamb or a goat, it says, and that that's going to then be eaten for the Passover.
That's right. And they're going to place it over the doors. And that's going to symbolize a kind of payment that the curse, in a sense, has fallen on the lamb so that it's not falling on them.
On the pig.
It's a substitutionary sort of thing that's going on here that they're symbolizing. So this is, Stu, this is the Passover meal. That's the most important, from this point on, becomes the most important celebration of the Jewish people. That becomes the Lord's Supper in the Christian tradition, right? And essentially it's a signification of what is it that actually makes us different, right? It's not anything inherent on ourselves. It's actually what God has done for us, ultimately in Jesus Christ, who is the fulfillment of this symbolism, who is the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world, whose blood is the payment over the people of God that sets us apart from others. So the Passover meal is named as such because when the angel of death comes over Egypt to bring the curse, when the angel sees the blood, he is to pass over those households, because essentially it's saying the curse has already been laid on the lamb, as it were, in this household. There is prescriptions here given with this meal that are also quite important, Stu, because they are to celebrate the meal. It's it's not to be boiled; it's to be roasted. Now, every part of this, you think, hang on, why are we getting? Why, in the midst of all of this action, are we being given
these details?
A recipe, like is this like some kind of recipe book now, right? Because it talks about, bitter herbs and, bread without yeast and all of these sorts of things. And they're even told how they are to eat it with their staff in their hand and their cloak tucked up.
Sandals on.
With your sandals on, right? And your robe tucked up into your belt, which is basically what you do when you're about to go out and walk.
Yeah.
Okay, so you let it down in your home, you pull it up when you walk so it doesn't get dirty.
And now, nothing's to be left by morning.
Nothing's to be left, right?
If there's any food not eaten, you need to burn it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the symbolism, Stu, of this is important actually because, and I think we need to be mindful of the fact that the Exodus event and the Passover becomes a paradigm for redemption in the big picture.
Yeah.
Now, that means redemption from, in a sense, this world system, ultimate, what for us is even still future. So there's symbolism here in the Passover meal that for us, I think, is still really important. Now, all of these instructions are basically saying you're going to eat a meal, like Psalm 23, in the presence of your enemies, right? You're going to eat and pause and eat this meal. But there's a sense of transitoriness with this. You're eating it in this mode of you're not going to be here long. You're ready to leave. There's a readiness to leave. The roasting is because it's the quickest way to cook it. You're going to make bread without yeast, so you're not waiting for it to rise.
Yes.
It takes a long time, right? Yeah. You're just going to cook it flat. The bitter herbs, they're readily available. Is this a symbolism, Stu, of the bitterness of their slavery? We're not sure about that, but certainly they're readily available. Everything here is about this sense of transitoriness, right? Where you're eating it with your staff in your hand, your sandals on, right? You're ready to go. This state of readiness. Now, this is a very important theme, Stu, in the teaching of Jesus throughout the New Testament about being in this state of readiness, constant readiness. It's a very Jewish idea, okay? Because we sustain ourselves in this world with a sense of this is just transitory. Yeah. We're ready to go. That we've got staff in our hands, sandals on our feet. It's this readiness because all of this is just transitory. And I think the Passover meal is so powerful in the way that it speaks to our present experience. If we apply this paradigm of the Passover, which I think we're invited to do through our scripture, to our general experience in this world and salvation from the Egypt, which represents this world system, a man-made order. God is saving us. I mean, he has saved us, okay? He's applied the blood of the Lamb to our lives.
Yes.
But in the future, for all of us, we're going to be saved from this world. So I think there's lots of important symbolism throughout here.
And I think it's important to note, as you did just earlier, such very specific instructions, because I think we see that continue. We'll talk a bit about that later once they're in the desert, the specific instructions, and they don't listen to the specific instructions over and over again.
Yeah.
And so a sense of importance of understanding for God that the details matter.
That's right. So we have the instructions and then we go back to the action. We're told that the angel of the Lord came over Egypt and struck down the firstborn of every household. And so there's this scene that's painted here of wailing all around, this terrible wailing from these households. I mean, it's a terrible moment here, Stu. But we've got to remember that all of this, the whole economy of Egypt has been built on the slave labor of God's people, right? Yeah. And so this cutting off the future, that they were a key to the future of Egypt. And so God is essentially cutting off the future of Egypt. Now, he also instructs them to go and ask the people for, right, they're about to go, about to leave. And so they're to ask their neighbors for articles.
Well, the Egyptian people are saying, go, 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 because they're just over it. The Egyptian people, they're over it now.
I think they've got the picture.
Yeah, and they actually say that. It says here in verse 33 of chapter 12, now the Egyptians pressured the people in order to send them quickly out of the country, for they said, we're all going to die. And then it goes on to say that they, as you say, they went to their neighbors and asked for gold and silver. And
Now there's a couple of things to this. First of all, the plunder of war is important symbolism. It's a sign of victory.
Yes.
So there is that, the plundering of Egypt. However, there's also this sense of God is, in a sense, giving them here the payment that was withheld for all of their service. There's that aspect as well in this, that they are coming out of Egypt where they were the poorest. They're coming out enriched. So there's an important flipping of the hierarchy here. That's important as well. Now, we're told that the Israelites, that they leave Egypt. We're told there are about 600,000 men on foot besides women and children. Now, there's a lot of discussion, Stu, about the numbers, and we don't need to get into this a great deal. It's interesting to know even the most conservative commentaries are saying that the number is problematic for a number of reasons. So commentators are unsure how to take this number. Now, one of the things here is that the word that's translated 1,000 is Aleph is also a word that refers to a military unit. We don't know really the size of those military units. You know, there are various ways to take this number. Now, 2.5 million people, even things like crossing the ocean.
So we got to 2.5 million, just for clarity, because it says there's only 600,000 men.
Yeah.
Then plus the
right.
women and children and the elderly and so on.
Yeah. So, for a number of reasons, this is very difficult, because even places where they're encamped or places where they journeyed through, like journeying through the sea in one night, for 2.5 million to file through, I mean, you're talking a long time. Yeah. Anyway, biblical numbers, it's the same thing when we get to the 430 years, because it's difficult to know sometimes how to take or how to interpret these numbers. Now, I'm not going to offer a conclusion on that, but there's lots of scholarly discussion about this. It's not something that we need to be hung up about. The point is that the Israelites left. There is this massive migration coming out of Egypt.
And again, we're not suggesting that the Bible is not trustworthy. What we're saying is the translation or the interpretation of what was written, we can't be super sure.
Yeah, we're not exactly sure how, because again, we just assume that the way that we use numbers is the same back then. And there is plenty of evidence that there could well be a difference there. So, and then it says in verse 40, now the length of the time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. Now, this number comes up again. So, for example, in Galatians, Paul says the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. The law, he says, introduced 430 years later. So Paul calculates that from the time of Abraham.
Right.
He's working in sync with the interpretation of the Jewish Greek translators that first translated the Bible in the mid-3rd century BC into Greek, called the Septuagint. It's really the first translation of the Bible. They actually added the words "and in Canaan." Anyway, so there's already a tradition of interpreting the 430 years as being the period of time from Abraham through to the end of slavery. And so Paul seems to be working with that. So that's just to address that difference.
Yeah.
There's also the promise to Abraham, which says in Genesis 15, where God says to Abraham, no for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors and so forth. In the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here. So it's like, okay, so how do you count the fourth generation? Now, of course, generations were longer at this stage.
Yeah.
So there are slightly different ways of counting it. All this depends on when you start. Is this start from Abraham? Is this start from when they came into Egypt? Slightly different interpretation. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. The point is we don't know exactly how long they were in Egypt, but it was a long time.
So then we move on to some specific instructions about the future honouring of the Passover, into future generations, the statute of the Passover.
Which is important, Stu, because I think this is very significant in the light of what's just happened with the curse and the symbolism around what's happened. Because it's interesting to note here that it's not exclusive. Now, it does say...
That's right.
So this is what it says from verse 43. The Lord said to Moses, "These are the regulations for the Passover meal. No foreigner may eat it." Now that sounds exclusive, but he goes on to explain. He says, "Any slave this is the first thing.
Yep. Any
slave you have bought may eat it after you have circumcised him." So first of all, it has an equalizing effect. So we might be concerned about, hang on, there's still slavery happening here. But okay, but let's all relax. This is the ancient world, right? Things are going to change, but this is actually the beginning of the change, because essentially you're looking at sitting around a table sharing a Passover meal with slaves.
Yes.
This is already a radical equalizing effect. So that's important to note that. So this is already... Now, we've talked about the hierarchy, Stu. That Passover is already flattening the hierarchy. Now, this is going to be made more explicit when we get to the Law of Moses, which is going to be all about flattening, destroying hierarchies. But here already you've got the seed of this. Now, it goes on to say, but a temporary resident or a hired worker may not eat it. Now, the reason that explains the foreigner. Now, notice it's temporary, right? If they're just coming in and they're leaving again, this is something for the believing community.
Yes.
Because it goes on to say, in verse 48, a foreigner residing among you who wants to celebrate the Lord's Passover must have all the males in his household circumcised, then he may take part, like one born in the land. So this is really important, Steve, because essentially it's saying that foreigners can join in.
Yes.
But they need to become part of the believing community, right? This is a sacred meal for God's sacred people. Anyone can come and belong to that people. I mean, this is really important because we can have this idea that this is excluding everyone else.
Yes.
But what you've got here is already a sign that God is an inclusive God, and that others can be involved and can receive this blessing, but they need to come under the covenant, right?
Yes.
And therefore apply the sign of the covenant to themselves and their households.
Yeah.
So, important point there. Then we have the law of the consecration of the firstborn. And again, all of this is in the midst of, all of this actions happening. We're like, come on, just keep telling me the story about how they come out of Egypt, right?
Yes.
So you've got these laws of the Passover. The consecration of the firstborn is an important ceremony. Let me just summarize it, Stu. So first of all, every firstborn, human or animal, basically, is claimed by God, claimed by Yahweh as belonging to him. That's the first thing, okay? Because remember, he's purchased, the plague came upon Egypt to destroy the firstborn, but the Israelites have been saved from that, okay? So essentially what God is saying, I have redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, ultimately in Christ, the firstborn, okay? So they belong to me in a very special sense. So basically, every firstborn animal is to be sacrificed to Yahweh, except for donkeys, which can be redeemed by a lamb instead. Then every firstborn son is to be redeemed. Now remember, in the ancient world, the inheritance was passed on to the firstborn son. They were the sort of family head, as it were. So, of course, all God's people belong to him, but the firstborn, in a sense, stands for the whole family. That's important.
Yep. So help me understand, just come back to me, then redeeming the firstborn.
Yes, okay.
It sort of says the firstborn son must be consecrated to me, but then can be redeemed. Does that mean now not consecrated?
No. So they're essentially redeemed to belong to God, in a sense.
Okay.
So,
because it says, but may be redeemed. which confused me.
Yeah. This is kind of redeemed from the fate of the lamb. So you sacrifice the lamb. So this is where the bit about the donkey, so that the donkeys can be redeemed. Now, look, I mean, donkeys were not eaten. They were beasts of burden. They were used for transport and so forth. The firstborn of these, basically carrier animals are redeemed by the lamb. And it's essentially the same with the firstborn sons. We're redeemed so that we don't suffer the consequences of our curse.
Okay.
So we're redeemed from the curse. Okay. So it's important to understand what we're redeemed from to belong to God. The sacrifice of the lamb is also a symbol of, giving something over to God. But the redemption is also an act of, I guess, recognition that we belong fully to God. As God's people. So it's a sort of this ceremony is a symbol of essentially the consecration of God's people as a whole.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little complicated, but that's the way it works.
It's important to try to understand that for sure. Yeah. Then it gets repeated again as we carry on. It seems like really important that this is understood as we get towards the end of chapter 13. Goes through it again as he recaps why this is happening. So when your sons ask you why this happens, it's to recount the story of Pharaoh stubbornly refusing to let them go.
Yeah, essentially it's saying that the right is to continually point back to the fact that you have been redeemed by God. Yeah. You deserve the same thing as everyone else. The only reason why you're set apart is because you have been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, essentially. That's what that's saying. Okay, then we get back to the action, Stu. We're told that it is an interesting statement here.
It's a little bit of a sort of side thing here, isn't it?
Yeah, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country.
Which was the
though it was shorter, right? Now, you think, as a lot of this is rushing, they're rushing to leave, wouldn't you take the shorter route? But we're told, for God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea, or the Sea of Reeds. Yeah. And it says, and the Israelites went up out of Egypt. Well, ready for battle or by 50s. I mean...
Mine says in battle formation.
Yeah, in battle formation.
Speaks back to a little bit to the 600,000 where they just battle regiments.
Yeah, the NIV, I think it's probably going a little bit too far because I don't think they're quite ready for battle, really. Yeah. But they are God's army in a sense, and so they're coming out in that kind of formation, in an orderly way, essentially, it's saying.
Yeah.
So wouldn't you think, Stu, that if God can bring all these plagues on Egypt, and if he can divide the sea, couldn't he defeat the Philistines?
Yeah.
So why not lead them through the Philistine
and demonstrate that as well?
Yeah. Well, there's a few reasons for this. First of all, the miracle that's going to happen at the sea is very symbolically important.
Yes.
So that's one thing.
Yeah.
But secondly, remember why the people of the land, remember that God had said to Abraham that he's not going to drive this people out of the land. He's going to wait till the sin of the Amorites reaches its full measure.
Yes.
Now, the Philistines are newcomers to this land. They're not really part of this yet, in a sense.
Yes, okay.
And then they hadn't really done anything. I think there's a few reasons here why this would not be part of God's plan. But I think the main one here is what's going to happen at the edge of the sea. There's going to be a time coming when God's going to defeat the Philistines, but that's because they're going to come against God's people, right?
Yeah.
Because the Abrahamic promise is going to be activated. At this stage, the Philistines haven't done anything to them, right?
Yes.
So just to go through and attack go through Philistine territory is not going to. There's no real point to that. But we're also, so they're going to go around to the sea. Now, I'll say more about this because that doesn't look like a good move strategically.
No, that's right.
But important note here, because they take the bones of Joseph. Now, the mention of this is important because this is fulfillment, right? That there had been this promise. First of all, Joseph had asked them to...
Because he knew that God was going to rescue him.
He knew, right.
Yep.
So in asking that, he was leaning into the promise given to Jacob, given to Abraham, that this people were going to come and be settled in this land. And so Joseph's request for his bones to be taken there is, in Joseph's case, is an expression of faith, right? So this mention of the bones of Joseph is essentially underscoring the fact that this is fulfillment. This is a fulfillment narrative. And this is, by the way, the first mention we have here of this amazing phenomena of pillar of cloud and fire, right? By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light so that they could travel day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. Now, this is the burning bush. This is the angel of the Lord that appeared to Moses in the burning bush. He is now with his people. We're meant to make that connection, right? And he is leading the way, right? This is the same God that spoke to Moses in Exodus chapter 3 is now doing this.
Yes.
And of course, fire, cloud, smoke are symbols of God's presence. We're going to see that again on Mount Sinai. There's going to be fire, cloud, and smoke on Mount Sinai.
And then the tabernacle imagery as we get further into the
right.
Yeah.
So then we read that the Lord said to Moses, and this is an interesting one, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp in this particular place by the sea. Now, this is them cornering themselves. It's not the quickest way.
No.
If you're afraid of the Egyptians coming out after you, this looks like the worst place to be. It doesn't look like you're going anywhere, actually.
Like,
where are we going here?
Circles. Yeah, exactly.
Right, you've just led us up against the sea. Looks like we're going in circles. He knows that Pharaoh's going to look at that and think, they're wandering around. And then we're told in verse 5, when the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, what have we done? We've let the Israelites go and have lost their service. This can be confusing, Stu, because wouldn't you think that he would already know? He's told them to leave.
Yeah.
But I think what is happening here is, remember, the request was, let us go for 3 days out in the wilderness.
That's right.
I think probably the 3 days are up.
And he's realizing they ain't coming back.
And he's basically being told here, they're not coming back. They're legging it, in the other direction. And it looks like they're wandering around. And we've lost their services, right? They're not coming back. We've lost their services. So he makes his chariots ready and he comes out after. It's a famous story, right? And they all freak out. They see him coming after him. This is where they complain. What have you done, Moses?
Yes.
We should have just stayed there. We're all going to be destroyed. Verse 13, Moses says, do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still. In other words, saying, guys, calm down.
Yeah.
In one commentator actually said this is probably something more like, guys, just be quiet.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, be still and
that's
reflective and meditative. That's just be quiet, right?
Yeah.
Now, it says, then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Now, because Moses there, in a sense, in solidarity with the people. So this is directed at the people crying out.
Yes.
In a sense, their lack of faith. Come on, he's saying, why are you crying out and grumbling about this? Tell the Israelites, raise your staff. Remember, the staff symbolizes God's strength. So this is something that God's going to do. The staff is important here. And the famous moment now comes where the sea is parted. Now, remember, this is the forces of death and chaos, the most feared thing.
In the ancient world,
In the ancient world. And they are going to go through the sea. And we're told that there were walls of water to the left and to the right. So they file in. The Egyptians are going to come after them, but eventually. But the pillar of fire goes in behind them to hold off the Egyptians, to allow them to file through. They go through all through the night, and it says in verse 22 of chapter 14, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water to their right and on their left. Now, the word sea there doesn't mean swamp.
No, that's right.
Doesn't mean a shallow lake.
Or
it
the tide
means
was
sea.
out.
Yam is the word there. The word wall for walls of water doesn't mean a little fence, right? It actually is the word that's used of high city walls, right? This is way overhead. So this is quite something. This would have been terrifying.
Yes.
Terrifying for the people. But amazing. God is holding back, sends this east wind. It's interesting, the east wind coming and, with the connection with the ruach of God, the spirit, the wind of God, hovering over the waters in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, connection there. And the waters are held back until the moment where they pass through, and then the pillar of cloud lifts and the Egyptians come in after them. And of course, the sea closes in over them. Now, Stu, have you ever thought, what about Pharaoh?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, because it never says here that Pharaoh, in fact, later on in the song of Moses and Miriam, it says that the best of Pharaoh's generals were drowned in the sea.
Yes.
But it actually never says that Pharaoh himself is drowned in the sea.
I imagine he stayed up back and was watching, like all good leaders.
Yeah, like all good leaders. There's no way, right? Because as they go in, I mean, they're getting bogged down. They're sinking into the sand. I mean, it's just mayhem when they get stuck in there essentially,
Yes.
and then
Water
the chaos, the forces of death close in over Egypt. So Pharaoh somehow managed to escape this, but the message is loud and clear. I mean, this is God fighting their battle and bringing death and chaos over the Egyptians, but saving his people through death and chaos. It's so rich in symbolism. That imagery is going to reverberate throughout Scripture.
I was just going to say, this story really paints the picture of what we're going to see repeated through Scripture.
Yeah, that's right.
Again.
It's reflected in Jesus walking on the water, calling Peter to come out and walk on the water.
Yeah, it's
such an important moment.
Just one thing before we move on, I want to say, because I think it's really easy for us to read this and, those stupid Israelites, God had been, and why are they moaning and groaning again? And yet we need to position ourselves not as Moses, but probably as the Israelites, because I know for myself, it doesn't matter how many times God has shown his providence when there's some big decision ahead of me and I feel God's leading me into something that I'm really uncertain about.
Yeah.
That doubt still comes back in our minds, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that's the reality of what's happening here.
That's right.
For the Israelites.
Then we have the first song in the Bible.
Yeah.
It's a song that's written by Moses, performed by Miriam, and it's a celebration of this event, and celebrating and marking these events, putting it into song form is an important way of this people remembering this, so that they never forget what's going to happen. So the inclusion of a song here is part of the gesture of enshrining something for future memory.
And that's a very common thing, obviously through, the Psalms, particularly the Psalms of Ascent, where everyone knew them. It was a way of, as you say, memorizing Scripture. And even today, you think about if you're teaching young kids the alphabet, you do it in a song.
That's right. You remember. That's the way you remember it.
Yeah.
Now, there are three stories that follow this on the other side of the Red Sea. So this amazing thing has happened, okay? God has saved them through the death, through the chaos. This also becomes a symbol of baptism, into being baptized, through the waters into a new kind of life. So now it's all about this new kind of life, right? This is a new order. God is leading them into a new way of living, and it's primarily a life of faith. Now, note here that God has done the saving already, and now he's going to teach them to trust him.
For provision.
For provision. Now, they're crossing the desert. They're thirsty. They're in a desert, and this is a real desert, Stu. This is in the Sinai Peninsula that they're moving into. This is dry. This is hot. They come to waters. The waters are bitter, which means they're salty. And they think we're done. We're finished. We can't last any longer. This is, you've again, as you say, let's not go too hard on them because they're desperate here.
Yeah.
They cry out. Now, God brings them to this point because he wants to show them something, right? And he commands Moses to take a piece of wood, cast it in the water, and the water is purified, right? It becomes fresh and they're able to drink. Then there's a question of food. There are three stories here. There's a water story, a food story, and then a water story, right? Yeah. They continue in the desert, but they've got no food, right? And then they're grumbling again. We should have, at least in Egypt we had food to eat.
Even though we were slaves, we had a pot of meat in front of us and we could eat it. Even though Pharaoh killed our children, that was better.
And we were slaves, But again,
we can understand totally. They're talking about survival.
This is difficult. At least they knew. At least there was a rhythm. At least they knew. It was it was a poor form of life, but goodness, it was predictable, at least in some measure. So now they feel like they're on death's door, like every moment, right? Because they're wandering in a desert, right? And the desert is a feared place. You didn't wander around in deserts. Yeah. This is what you did when you were sent off into exile, and this is a disaster to be wandering around in a desert. So it's a very difficult thing for them, right? So the Lord says to Moses, I'm going to rain down bread from heaven, and he's also going to send them quail. This is to summarize this story, Stu. The quail is a one-off. There's only one mention of the sending of all of this quail. That only happens once, and it's mentioned in verse 13. It's the only mention of that. Now, of course, they've been wandering. This is an initial provision of food for them, which is probably much needed at this point, to be honest. Then we have the manna. Now, the manna is very important. We're told that the manna, that it tastes like wafers and honey.
Yeah.
It has this white
Coriander seed and
kind of texture of coriander. It's like wafer. Now we might imagine, because we think bread from it. We think like a dry crust of bread, right? Like boring. Actually, the way that it's described here is probably the richest and the rare kind of delicacy of that time. Honey was very, very rare, right? Yeah. Wafers, again, like this is basically saying it tasted like the best kind of food ever.
Yeah.
So this is not just him throwing crusts to his people. He is providing them. And the way that this works is that each day they are to gather only what is needed for that day. This is part of the lesson, right?
Yeah.
They're being taught to trust God for their daily bread. This is the notion, and we get this in the Lord's Prayer. Give us today our daily bread, right? God will give us what we need for this day. And they're not to store it up, right? Because storing up is like us securing our future.
Yeah.
They're not to do that.
Because earlier in chapter 16, verse 4, it says, Then the Lord said to Moses, I am going to rain bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. This way I will test them to see whether or not they will follow my instructions.
Yeah. Are they going to trust me for tomorrow is the point, right?
Exactly.
Because they're going to think, we're in the middle of a desert. Quick, let's hoard all this up. Let's grab what we can. And God's saying, no, I don't want you to do that. No. I want you to trust me for tomorrow's provision.
Correct.
Again, that would have been hard. And of course, we're told that some Israelites did store it up.
Yes.
And it went rotten.
Yeah.
So it was not storable. However, on the day before the Sabbath, they were able to collect 2 days worth, and that lasted so that they didn't have to gather on the Sabbath. So again, really important. And that's basically, this is going to happen. They're going to live off the manna for the next 40 years until, and we're told when they entered into the land, the manna stops.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Just incredible.
And we're told, verse 35, the Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to a land that was settled. Then the next one, again, is the question of water. This time, again, they're thirsty. They grumble. You'd think they'd be getting it at this stage. It's interesting because, again, we can seem impatient with them. But listen, what about, like I have seen God's provision again and again and again in my life. But when we come to a point of, there's no money in the account, you got bills, you got whatever it suddenly,
is.
Whatever it is, I know the experience that
comes.
Even no matter how many times God has provided before, that you're freaking out. It's like, come on, we just got to remember God has provided before. So this is a familiar experience. There's that initial panic, some sleepless nights, and you just got to remember, hang on. I've seen the faithfulness of God before. I will see the faithfulness of God again.
But I think there's an important aspect to that where we still need to do what we know to do, and we're going to see that as we come into the battle really ahead. It's not just sit back, put your feet up, and God will take care of it.
Yeah.
We do need to do what we know to do.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think also 40 years, there's a whole new generation of people who having to be reminded again about who God is.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And this time, God commands Moses to strike the rock, and he strikes it with, again, the staff is important because it's God providing here, and water comes from the rock. I've been to the place actually where it's alleged that this happened. It's the spring of Moses in Jordan. So this is him testing their faith, right? He is stretching them. He's teaching them what it means to live by faith.
Yeah.
This theme is going to continue when they are attacked, and they're attacked by the Amalekites.
Great grandson of Esau.
That's right.
Somewhere around there.
So the Amalekites are the descendants of Esau. Amalek was a grandson of Esau. Now remember the tension between Jacob and Esau. Now they reconciled in the end, but the descendants of Esau, who were the Amalekites and eventually going to be the Edomites as well, this is going to be kind of a traditional opposition, the traditional nemesis of Israel. They're going to come back, even right into the post-exilic period in the book of Esther. We're going to see this. We have the first mention of Joshua.
Yes, we do.
Right. we're told that Moses says to Joshua, choose some men, go out and fight the Amalekites, and he's going to stand on the hill with the staff of God in his hand. So the idea here is that he's going to raise the staff. Now, the staff, remember, is a symbol of God's power at work. So they are to rely on the power of God. This is the point here. This is continuous with everything that they've learned with the water from the rock and the manna. They're relying on God's power to provide what they need. And so Moses standing on the hill with his arms raised over his head is not just about his, it is, in a sense, it's a symbol of prayer, but it's actually a symbol of raising up the staff of God, because it's by God's power that they're going to defeat this. Now, when he lowers his arms, they start losing.
He gets tired and decides to take a rest.
Yeah. Now, it's not some kind of, ritual or...
No.
This is a sign. Remember, God is teaching his people here, right?
Yeah.
So when he lowers his arms, they start losing because it goes back to their strength and their power. But when he raises the staff of God by raising his hands, then it's God's power at work. And so eventually Aaron and Hur, they come alongside Moses and hold up his arms so that he can sustain this for the whole day. Yeah.
Ultimately, Joshua defeats Amalek.
That's right.
And his armies with the sword. And the Lord then said to Moses, write this down on a scroll as a reminder and recite it to Joshua. I will completely blot out the memory of Amalek under heaven.
Yeah, we're going to get statements like that. Moses being told to write things down is going to happen all the way through this story. And I think it's just important to note that, because this is why we ascribe all of this originally to Moses. There are clearly later editors at work, because it says things like, such and such a thing monument is there to this day, right?
Yes.
So it receives its final version, much later, but all these original things were recorded originally by Moses. So, Stu, finally, we have this pause in all of the action, and Moses he's essentially come out to the area of Midian. So, it says that his father-in-law Jethro,
he was a priest, a Midianite priest.
Comes out to him, but this is him coming out to welcome him. This is because Moses has essentially come back to Midian.
To the area.
As God said. Because God said the sign will be in Exodus 3 and 4. The sign will be that you'll come back to this place, to this mountain. And so Moses has come back. His father-in-law Jethro, also referred to as Reuel.
Yes.
He comes out to him. He's got his wife and his children with him, so that they have...
Moses' wife and children.
Moses' wife and children.
Zipporah
have
kids,
gone ahead to be with him. And he's heard everything probably from them that's happened. And so this moment, it's a beautiful moment actually, where you have essentially a foreigner. He is essentially a foreigner. He's a priest of Midian. He's amongst the Midianites. They're not the people of Israel, but he acknowledges the work of God. This is someone essentially coming to faith. This is like the conversion of Jethro. He's a priest of Midian, but he is now essentially going to become one of God's people. So a priest of Midian becomes one of God's people. It's almost like the first of the harvest of people from outside of Israel. It's like this symbol.
Yes.
You get these moments where you get people from the outside being incorporated into the people of Israel. It's always a symbol of what's coming up ahead in the New Testament period.
And the respect Moses shows him as his father-in-law.
Yeah.
He bows down and kisses him to thank him, I guess, and to welcome him. But
he comes out with the two sons, Gershom and Eleazar. They're not, interestingly, not prominent characters, and there's no dynasty here. Which is interesting, because you would expect that there would be. In the ancient world, founding a dynasty of rulers is the goal, but we hear pretty much nothing more about those almost guys. Nothing more about these people. But he is mentioned in Judges, not actually in such a good light. Is mentioned later on, but we get almost nothing. So again, we're in a state of contrast here. Even a little detail like that, the fact that this is the last we hear of his sons.
Yes.
It's Joshua that takes over.
Yeah, that's right. And we find out a little bit why later in the story. But in the meantime, as we get up to it, we've now got this, the Egyptians have been dealt with. They're now in the desert still and trying to find their way to the promised land. And there's now Moses is trying to manage a lot of people.
He's now got to manage a lot of people. So, and they're bringing their disputes. Maybe things left, unsorted
Unresolved,
out. Maybe things from it could be things from the journey. It could be, they've rushed. Who knows what's going on here? But they're bringing all these disputes. And
it's a group of people.
It's a group of people. He's leading a group of people, right? Jethro sees him trying to manage this.
Yes.
And he says, this is not right. You need to set apart a group of elders who can essentially act as judges and do this for you in accordance with God's decrees. Now, we have judges.
Yes.
But by what are they judging? This is interesting why this is placed here.
Yes.
So we have a judicial system is set up, but what are they judging by? What's going to happen next is that he's going to give them the law.
And I think it's important to note too, there were two, I feel reading that, there were two things that Jethro was trying to deal with there. He was dealing with the fact that Moses had to be sustainable. He was just going to completely burn out if he tried to do this all on his own. But also I sense the importance of bringing people in to be part of the process. So it's not like one person making decrees. It's like we're all part of deciding what's best for all of us collectively.
Yeah, that's right.
Some wisdom in that from Jethro, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is basically sets up the judicial system that's going to carry on through the period to follow. This kind of sets us up for the question of the law and by what principles. What does this new order look like? That's the open question now. Okay, he's led them out of the old or out of the human order, and he's teaching them to walk by faith. But what are they going to walk by? And this is where we're going to learn about God's decrees, God putting things in the right order. Even the 10 Commandments are very much about that. It begins with, you shall have no other gods before me. Put God first. In a sense, if we're to say anything about the new order, Stu, it's all about putting God first. When things are ordered rightly, there is peace, there is stability, and there is this overcoming of chaos by putting God preeminent and by trusting in Him.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Thrive Deeper. Our home on the internet is thrivetoday.tv. You can contact us, ask questions, see all our resources and much more at our website thrivetoday.tv. We really appreciate the questions and thoughts about what you're reading as we go through the Bible with Thrive. Until next time, our prayer is that these shows will inspire you to go deeper and thrive.